microphones if you're not reading. As much as possible, of course. There we go. Little introduction here to you folks out in YouTube land. We're going to be doing the section called Hades today. This is where um, they are going to the funeral. And there's all kinds of interactions that happen, and Joyce gets really outrageous when he has Leopold Bloom describing the events at the funeral. It's a rather shocking section, but it's pretty clear for the most part. There's not too much obfuscation going on. And with that, we are ready to go, and I will begin reading. Here we go. Martin Cunningham first poked his silk-hatted head in the creaking carriage and entered deftly, seating himself. Mr. Power stepped in after him, curving his height with care. "Come on, Simon." "After you," Mr. Bloom said. Mr. Dedalus covered himself quickly and got in, saying, "Yes, yes." "Are we all here now?" Martin Cunningham asked. "Come along, Bloom." Mr. Bloom entered and sat in the vacant place. He pulled the door in after him and slammed it tight till it shut tight. He passed an arm through an arm strap and looked seriously from the open carriage window at the lowered blinds of the avenue. One dragged aside an old lady peeping, nose white flattened against the pane, thanking her stars she was passed over. Extraordinary the interest they take in a corpse. Glad to see us go, so we give them glad to see us go. We give them such trouble coming. Job seems to suit them. Hugger-mugger in corners, slopping about in slipper-slappers for fear he'd wake. Then getting it ready, laying it out. Molly and Mrs. Fleming making the bed. Pull it more to your side. Our winding sheet. Never know who will touch you dead. Wash and shampoo. I believe they clip the nails in the hair. Keep a bit in an envelope. Grow all the same. Unclean job. Anne.
All waited. Nothing was said. Stowing in the reeds, probably. I was sitting on something hard. Ah, that soap in my hip pocket. Better shift it out of that. Wait for an opportunity. All waited. Then wheels were heard from in front turning. Then nearer, then horses' hoofs. A jolt. Their carriage began to move, creaking and swaying. Other hoofs and creaking wheels started behind. The blinds of the avenue passed, and number 9, which is its creped knocker door ajar, at walking pace. They waited still, their knees jogging till they had turned and were passing along the tram tracks. Tritonville Road. Quicker. The wheels rattled rolling over the cobbled causeway, and the crazy glasses shook rattling in the door frames. What was it he taking? What way is he taking us? Mr. Power asked through both windows. Irish Town, Martin Cunningham said. Rings End, Brunswick Street. Mr. Dedalus nodded, looking out. That's a fine old custom, he said. I'm glad to see it has not died out. All watched a while, through their windows, caps and hats lifted by passers. Respect. The carriage swerved from the tram track to the smoother road past Watery Lane. Mr. Bloom at gaze saw a lit young man, clad in mourning, a wide hat. There's a friend of yours gone by, Dedalus, he said. Who is that? Your son and heir. Where is he? Mr. Dedalus said, stretching over across. Next, please.
The carriage, passing the open drains and mounds of ripped-up roadway before the tenement houses, lurched round the corner and, swerving back to the tram track, rolled on noisily with chattering wheels. Mr. Dedalus fell back, saying, "Was that Mulligan cad with him? as silkhatted. No, Mr. Bloom said. He was alone. Down with his Aunt Sally, I suppose, Mr. Dedalus said. The Goulding faction. The drunken little cuss-drawer and Chrissy, Papa's little lump of dung. The wise child that knows her own father. Mr. Bloom smiled joylessly on Ringsend Road. Wallace Brothers, the Bottle Works, Dodder Bridge. Richie Goulding and the Legal Bag. Goulding, Collis and Ward, he calls the firm. His jokes are getting a bit damp. Great card he was, waltzing in Stamer Street with Ignatius Gallagher on a Sunday morning, the landlady's 2 hats pinned on his head. Out on the rampage all night, beginning to tell on him now, that backache of his, I fear. Wife ironing his back, thinks he'll cure it with pills. All breadcrumbs they are, about 600% profit. He's in with the low-down crowd, Mr. Dedalus snarled. That Mulligan is a contaminated, bloody, double-dyed ruffian by all accounts. His name stinks all over Dublin. But with the help of God and his blessed mother, I'll make it my business to write a letter one of these days to his mother or his aunt, or whatever she is that will open her eye as wide as a gate. I'll tickle his catastrophe, believe you me. He cried above the clatter of the wheels. Next, please.
I won't have her bastard if a nephew ruined my son. A counter-jumper's son, selling tapes and my cousin, Peter Paul McSwinney's. Not unlikely, he ceased. Mr. Bloom glanced from his angry moustache to Mr. Power's mild face and Martin Cunningham's eyes and beard gravely shaking. Noisy, self-willed man, full of his son. He's right. Something to hand on. If little Rudy had lived, see him grow up, hear his voice in the house, walking beside Molly in an Eton suit, my son, me, in his eyes. Strange feeling it would be, from me, just a chance. Must have been that morning in Raymond Terrace. She was at the window watching the 2 dogs at it by the wall of the cease to do no evil, and the sergeant grinning up. She had that cream gown on with the rip she never stitched. Gives a touch, Polly. God, I'm dying for it. How life begins. A big den. Had to refuse the Greystones concert. My son inside her. I could have helped him on in life. I could. Make him independent. Learn German, too. Are we late? Mr. Power asked. 10 minutes, Martin Cunningham said, looking at his watch. Molly, Millie. Same thing, watered down. Her, tomboy oats. Oh, jumping Jupiter, ye gods and little fishes. Still, she's a dear girl. Soon be a woman. Mullingar. Dearest Papley. Young student. Yes, yes, a woman too. Life. The carriage heeled over and back, their 4 trunks swaying. Uncle Courtney might have given us a more commodious yoke, Mr. Power said. He might, Mr. Dedalus replied, if he hadn't that squint troubling him. Do you follow me? He closed his left eye. Martin Cunningham began to brush away crust crumbs from under his thighs. What is this? He said, in the name of God, crumbs. Someone seems to have been making a picnic party here lately, Mr. Power said. All raised their thighs, eyed with disfavor the mild-dewed buttonless leather of the seats. Mr. Dedalus, twisting his nose, frowned downward and said, oh, no, unless I'm greatly mistaken. What do you think, Martin? Struck me too, Martin Cunningham said. Mr. Bloom set his thigh down. Glad I took that bath. Feel my feet quite clean, but I wish Mrs. Fleming had darned these socks better. Mitchell?
Mr. Dedalus sighed resignedly. After all, he said, it's the most natural thing in the world. Did Tom Carnan turn up? Martin Cunningham asked, twirling the peak of his beard gently. Yes, Mr. Bloom answered. He's behind with Ned Lambert and Hines. And Coney Kelleher himself? Mr. Power asked. At the cemetery, Martin Cunningham said. I met McCoy this morning, Mr. Bloom said. He said he'd try to come. The carriage halted short. What's wrong? We are stopped. Where are we? Mr. Bloom put his head out of the window. The Grand Canal, he said. Gas works. Whooping cough, they say it cures. Good job Millie never got it. Poor children. Doubles them up black and blue in convulsions. Shame really. Got off lightly with illness compared. Only measles. Flaxseed tea. Scarlatina. Influenza. Epidemics. Canvassing for death. Don't miss this chance. Dog's home over there. Poor old Athos. Be good, Athos. Leopold is my last wish. Thy will be done. We obey them in the grave. A dying scroll. He took it to heart, pined away. Quiet brute. Old men's dogs usually are. A raindrop spat on his hat. He drew back and saw an instant of shower spray dots over the gray flags. Apart, curious, like through a colander. I thought it would. My boots were creaking, I remember now. The weather is changing, he said quietly. A pity it did not keep up fine, Martin Cunningham said. Wanted for the country, Mr. Power said. There's the sun again coming out. Mr. Dedalus, peering through his glasses toward the veiled sun, hurled a mute curse at the sky. It's as uncertain as a child's bottom, he said. We are off again. The carriage turned again its stiff wheels, and their trunk swayed gently. Martin Cunningham twirled more quickly the peak of his beard. Next, please.
Tom Kerr.
I'm sorry. I think it's me, Jim.
Yeah, it is. It is.
Oh, sorry. My apologies. My apologies.
It's all
Dave.
good. It's all. I'll turn it over to you in just a sec.
Okay, sorry
okay.
for such enthusiasm.
Okay, I think this is where we were. Tom Kernan was immense last night, he said, and Paddy Leonard taking him off to his face. Oh, draw him out, Martin, Mr. Powers said eagerly. Wait till you hear him, Simon, on Ben Dollard singing of the Coffee Boy. Immense, Martin Cunningham said pompously. His singing of that simple ballad, Martin, is the most trenchant rendering I ever heard in the whole course of my experience. Trenchant, Mr. Powers said, laughing. He's dead nuts on that and the retrospective arrangement. Did you read Dan Dawson's speech? Martin Cunningham asked. I did not then, Mr. Dedalus said. Where is it? In the paper this morning. Mr. Bloom took the paper from his inside pocket. That book I must change for her. No, Mr. Dedalus said quickly. Later on, please. Mr. Bloom's glance traveled down the edge of the paper, scanning the deaths. Cowan, Coleman, Ningham, Fawcett, Lowry, Melman, Peake. What Peake is that? Is that the chap was in Crosby and Allane's? No. Sexton Erbright. Inked characters fast fading on the frayed breaking paper. Thanks to the little flower, sadly missed. To the inexpressible grief of his, aged 88 after a long and tedious illness. Month's mind, Quinlan. on whose soul sweet Jesus have mercy. It is now a month since dear Henry fled to his home up above in the sky, while his family weeps and mourns his loss, hoping some day to meet him on high. I tore up the envelope. Yes, where did I put her letter after I read it in the bath? He patted his waistcoat pocket. There, all right. Dear Henry, fled. Before my patients are exhausted. National School, Meads Yard, the Hazard. Only 2 there now, nodding, full as a tick. Too much bone in their skulls, the other trotting around with a fare. An hour ago I was passing there. The Jarvies raised their hats. A pointsman's back straightened itself upright suddenly against a tramway standard by Mr. Bloom's window. Couldn't he invent something automatic so that the wheel itself, much handier? Well, but that fellow would lose his job then. Well, but then another fellow would get a job making the new invention. Ancient concert rooms, nothing on there. A man in a buff suit with a crepe armlet, not much grief there. Quarter morning, people in law perhaps. They went past the bleak pulpit of St. Mark's, under the railway bridge, past the Queen's Theatre, in silence. Hoardings. Eugene Stratton, Mrs. Bandyman Palmer. Could I go and see Leah tonight, I wonder? I said, aye. Or the Lily of Killarney. Elster Grimes Opera Company, big, powerful change. Wet, bright bills for next week. One on the Bristol. Martin Cunningham could work a pass for the Gaiety. Have to stand a drink or two. It's as broad as it is long. Jim?
Thanks, Dave. He's coming in the afternoon for songs. Plastos, Sir Philip Crampton's memorial fountain bust. Who is he? How do you do, Martin Cunningham said, raising his palm to his brow in salute. He doesn't see us, Mr. Power said. Yes, he does. How do you do? Oh, Mr. Dedalus violin, Mr. Power said. There, he's airing his quiff. Just that moment I was thinking. Mr. Dedalus bent across to salute. From the door of the red bank, the white disk of a straw hat flashes reply. Past. Mr. Bloom reviewed his nails of his left hand, then those of his right hand. The nails, yes. Is there anything more in him that day she sees? Fascination, worst man in Dublin, that keeps him alive. They sometimes feel what a person is. Instinct. But what a type like that. My nails. I was just looking at them, well paired, and after thinking alone, body getting a bit softy. I would notice that from remembering. What causes that? I suppose the skin can't contract quickly enough when the flesh falls off, but the shape is there. The shape is still there. Shoulders, hips, plump. Night of the dance dressing, shift struck between the cheeks behind. He clasped his hands between his knees and, satisfied, sent his vacant glance over their faces. Mr. Power asks, how is the concert tour getting on, Bloom? Oh, very well, Mr. Bloom said. I hear great accounts of it. It's a good idea, you see. Are you going yourself? Well, no, Mr. Bloom said. In point of fact, I have to go down to the County Clare on some private business. You see, the idea is to tour the chief towns. What you lose on one, you can make up on the other. Quite so, Martin Cunningham said. Mary Anson is up there now. Have you good artists? Louis Werner is touring her, Mr. Bloom said. Oh, yes, we'll have all the top knobbers. DJ Doyle and John McCormack, I hope, and the best, in fact. And Madame, Mr. Power said, smiling. Last but not least. Next, please.
Mr. Bloom unclasped his hands in a gesture of soft politeness and clasped them. Smith O'Brien. Someone had laid a bunch of flowers there. Woman. Must be his death day. For many happy returns. The carriage, wheeling by feral statue, united noiselessly their unresisting knees. Oot! A dull-garbed old man from the curbstone tendered his wares, his mouth opening. Oot! 4 bootlaces for a penny. Wonder why he was stuck off the rolls. At his office in Hume Street, same house as Molly's namesake. Tweedy, Brown solicitor for Waterford. Has that silk hat ever since. Relics of old decency. Mourning too. Terrible come down. Poor wretch. Kicked about like snuff at a wake. O'Callaghan on his last legs. And Madame? 20 past 11. Up. Mrs. Fleming is in to clean, doing her hair, humming, Voglio non vorrei. No, vorrei e non. Looking at the tips of her hairs to see if they are split. Mi trema un poco il. Beautiful on that tray, her voice is, weeping tone. A thrush, a throstle. There's a word, throstle, that expressed that. His eyes passed lightly over Mr. Power's good-looking face, grayish over the ears. Madame, smiling, I smiled back. Smile goes a long way. Only politeness, perhaps. Nice fellow. Who knows? Is it true about the woman he keeps? Not pleasant for the wife. Yet they say, who was it told me there is no carnal? You would imagine that would get played out pretty quick. Yes, it was Crofton met him one evening, bringing her a pound of rump steak. What is this she was? Barmaid at Jury's? Or the Mora, was it? They passed under the huge cloak Liberator's form. Martin Cunningham nudged Mr. Power. Next, please.
Of the tribe of Reuben, he said. A tall, black-bearded figure bent on his stick, stumping around the corner of Elvery's elephant house, showed them a curved hand open on his spine. In all this pristine beauty, Mr. Power said. Mr. Dedalus looked after the stumping finger and said mildly, the devil break the hasp of your back. Mr. Power, collapsing in laughter, shaded his face from the window as the carriage passed. Gray's statue. We've all been there, Martin Cunningham said broadly. His eyes met Mr. Bloom's eyes. He caressed his beard, adding, well, nearly all of us. Mr. Bloom began to speak with sudden eagerness to his companions' faces. That's an awfully good one that's going the rounds about Reuben J. and the son. About the boatman, Mr. Power said. Yes, isn't it awfully good? What is that? Mr. Dedalus asked. I didn't hear it. There was a girl in the case, Mr. Bloom began, and he determined to send him to the Isle of Man out of harm's way. When they were both... What? Mr. Dedalus asked. That confirmed bloody hobbledehoy, is it? Yes, Mr. Bloom said. They were both on the way to the boat, and he tried to drown. Drown? Barabbas, Mr. Dedalus cried. I wish to Christ he did. Mr. Power sent a long laugh down his shaded nostrils. No, Mr. Bloom said, the son himself. Martin Cunningham thwarted his speech rudely. Reuben J. and the son were piking it down the quay next the river on the way to the Isle of Man boat, and the young chiselers suddenly got loose and over the wall with him into the Liffey. For God's sake, Mr. Dedalus exclaimed in fright. Is he dead? Dead? Martin Cunningham cried. Not he. A boatman got a pole and fished him out by the slack of the breeches, and he was landed up to the further end quay. More dead than alive. Half the town was there. Yes, Mr. Bloom said, but the funny part is... And Reuben J., Martin Cunningham said, gave the boatman a florin for saving his son's life. A stifled sigh came from under Mr. Power's hand. Oh, he did, Martin Cunningham affirmed, like a hero, a silver florin. Isn't it awfully good, Mr. Bloom said eagerly. 1 8 too much, Mr. Dedalus said dryly. Mr. Power choked, laughed, burst quietly in the carriage. Nelson's pillar. 8 plums a penny, 8 for a penny. We had better look a little serious, Martin Cunningham said. Mr. Dedalus sighed. And then indeed, he said, poor little Paddy wouldn't grudge us a laugh. Many a good one he told himself. The Lord forgive me, Mr. Power said, wiping his wet eyes with his fingers. Poor Paddy. I little thought a week ago when I saw him last, and he was in his usual health, that I'd be driving after him like this. He's gone from us. Next, please. Donna.
As decent a little man as ever wore a hat, Mr. Dedalus said. He went very suddenly. Breakdown, Martin Cunningham said. Heart. Tapped his chest sadly. Blazing face, red hot. Too much John Barleycorn. Cure for a red nose. Drink like the devil till it turns Adelaide. A lot of money he spent colouring it. Mr. Power gazed at the passing houses with rueful apprehension. He had a sudden death, poor fellow, he said. The best death, Mr. Bloom said. Their wide-open eyes looked at him. No suffering, he said. A moment and all is over, like dying in sleep. No one spoke. Dead side of the street, this. Dull business by day, land agents, Temperance Hotel, Falconer's Railway Guide, Civil Service College, Guilds, Catholic Club, the Industrial Blind. Why? Some reason, sun or wind, at night too, chummies and slavies, under the patronage of the late Father Matthew, foundation stone for Parnell. Breakdown, art. White horses with white frontlet plumes came round the rotunda corner, galloping. Tiny coffin flashed by. In a hurry to bury, a mourning coach. Unmarried, black for the married, highball for the bachelors, done for a nun. Sad, Martin Cunningham said, a child. A dwarf's face, mauve and wrinkled, like little Rudy's was. Dwarf's body, weak as putty, in a white-lined deal box. Burial-friendly society pays. Penny a week for a sod of turf. Our little beggar baby. Meant nothing, mistake of nature. If it's healthy, it's from the mother. If not the man, better look next time. Poor little thing, Mr. Dedalus said. It's well out of it. Carriage climbed more slowly the hill of Rutland Square. Rattle his bones over the stones, only a pauper nobody owns. In the midst of life, Martin Cunningham said. But worst of all, Mr. Power said, is the man who takes his own life. Martin Cunningham drew out his watch briskly, coughed and put it back. The greatest disgrace to have in the family, Mr. Power added. Temporary insanity, of course, Martin Cunningham said decisively. We must take a charitable view of it. They say a man who does it is a coward, Mr. Dedalus said. It's not for us to judge, Martin Cunningham said. Mr. Bloom, out to speak, closed his lips again. Martin Cunningham's large eyes, looking away now, sympathetic human man he is, intelligent, like Shakespeare's face. Always a good word to say. They have no mercy on that here, or infanticide. Refuse Christian burial. He used to drive a stake of wood through his heart in the grave, as if it wasn't broken already. Yet sometimes they repent too late. Found in the riverbed, clutching rushes. He looked at me, and that awful drunkard of a wife of his, setting up house for her time after time, and then pawning the furniture on him every Saturday almost, leading him the life of the damned. Wear the heart out of a stone, that. Monday morning, start afresh, shoulder to the wheel. Lord, she must have looked a sight that night. Dedalus told me he was in there, drunk about the place, and capering with Martin's umbrella. And they called me the Jewel of Asia the Geisha. He looked away from me. He knows, rattle his bones. That afternoon of the inquest, the red-labelled bottle on the table, the room in the hotel with hunting pictures, stuffy it was, sunlight through the slats of the Venetian blinds. The coroner's ears, big and hairy, boots giving evidence. Thought he was asleep first, then saw like yellow streaks on his face, had slipped down to the foot of the bed. Verdict, overdose. Death by misadventure. A letter for my son Leopold. Next, please.
No more pain. Wake no more. Nobody owns. The carriage rattles swiftly along Blessington Street over the stones. We are going the pace, I think, Martin Cunningham said. God grant he doesn't upset us on the road, Mr. Power said. I hope not, Martin Cunningham said. That would be a great race tomorrow in Germany. That will be a great race tomorrow in Germany, the Gordon Bennett. Yes, by Jove, Mr. Dedalus said. That will be worth seeing, Faith. As they turned into Berkeley Street, a street organ near the basin sent over and after them a rollicking, rattling song of the halls. Has anybody here seen Kelly? K-E-L-L-E-L-L-E-L-Y, Dead March from Saul. He's as bad as old Antonio. He left me on my ownio. Pirouette. The Mater Misericordiae, Eccles Street. My house down there, big place. Ward for incurables there, very encouraging. Our Lady's Hospice for the dying. Dead house handy underneath. That's where old Mrs. Reardon died. They look terrible, the women. Her feeding cup and rubbing her mouth with the spoon, then the screen round her bed for her to die. Nice young student that was, dressed. That bite the bee gave me. He's gone over to the lying-in hospital, they told me. From one extreme to the other. The carriage galloped round a corner, stopped. What's wrong now? The divided drove of branded cattle passed the windows, lowing, slouching on their padded hooves, whisking their tails slowly on their clotted bony croups. Outside them and through them ran rattled sheep, bleating their fear. Emigrants, Mr. Power said. Huh! The drover's voice cried, his switch sounding on their flanks. Huh! Out of that! Thursday, of course. Tomorrow is killing day. Springers. Cuff sold them about 27 quid each. For Liverpool, probably. Roast beef for old England. They buy up all the juicy ones. Then the fifth quarter is lost. All that raw stuff, hide, air, horns, comes to a big thing in a year. Dead meat trade. Byproducts of the slaughterhouses for tanneries, soap, margarine. Wonder if that dodge works now, getting dicky meat off the train at Clonsilla. The carriage moved on through the drove. I can't make out why the corporation doesn't run a tram line from the park gate to the quays, Mr. Bloom said. All those animals could be taken in trucks down to the boats instead of blocking up the thoroughfare, Mr. Cunningham said. Quite right. They ought to. Yes, Mr. Bloom said. And another thing I've often thought is to have municipal funeral trams, like they have in Milan, you know, run the line out to the cemetery gates and have special trams, hearse and carriage and all. Don't you see what I mean? Oh, that'd be damned for a story, Mr. Little said. Pullman car and saloon dining room. A poor outlook for Corny, Mr. Power added. Why? Mr. Bloom asked, turning to Mr. Dedalus. Wouldn't it be more decent than galloping two abreast? Well, there's something in that, Mr. Dedalus granted. And Martin Cunningham said we wouldn't have the scenes like that when the hearse capsized round Dumfries and upset the coffin onto the road. Mishko?
That was terrible, Mr. Power's shocked face said, and the corpse fell about the road. Terrible. First round, Dumfries, Mr. Dedalus said, nodding. Gordon Bennett cup. Praises be to God, Martin Cunningham said piously. Boom! Upset. A coffin bumped out onto the road. Burst open. Paddy Dignam shot out and rolling over stiff in the dust in the brown habit too large for him. Red face, grey now, mouth fallen open, asking what's up now. Quite right to cross it. Looks horrid open. Then the inside decomposed quickly. Much better to close up all the orifices. Yes, also with wax. The sphincters seal up all. Dunphy's, Mr. Power announced as the carriage turned right. Dunphy's corner. Mourning coaches drawn up, drowning their grief, opposed by the wayside. Tip-top position for a pub. Expect we'll pull up here on the way back to drink his health. Pass round the consolation, elixir of life. But suppose now it did happen. Would he bleed if a nail, say, cut him in the knocking about? He would and he wouldn't, I suppose. Depends on where. The circulation stops. Still some might ooze out of artery. It would be better to bury them in blood, a dark red. In silence, they drove along Pibsborough Road. An empty hearse trotted by, coming from the cemetery. Looks relieved. Closeguns Bridge, the Royal Canal. Water rushed roaring through the sluices. A man stood on his dropping barge between clumps of turf. On the topmost by the lock, a slacked horse aboard of the bugaboo. Their eyes watched him. On the slow, weedy waterway, he had floated on his raft coastward over Ireland, drawn by the haulage rope past beds of reeds, over slime, mud-choked bottles, carrion dogs, Athlone, Mullingar, Moybury. I could make a walking tour to see Millie by the canal, or cycle down. Hire some old clock safety. Wren had one the other day at the auction, but the ladies. Developing waterways. James McCann's hobby to row me over the ferry. Cheaper transit by easy stages. Houseboats, camping out. Also horses. To heaven by water. Perhaps I will be out riding. Come as a surprise. Leg slip, Clonsale, dropping down, lock by lock to Dublin, with staff from the Midland bogs. Salute. He lifted his brown stalwart, saluting Paddy Dignam. They drove on past Brian Broyne house, near it now. I wonder how is our friend Fogarty getting on, Mr. Power said. Better ask Tom Carnan, Mr. Dedalus said. How is that? Martin Cunningham said. Left him weeping, I suppose. Though lost to sight, Mr. Dedalus said, to memory dear. The carriage steered left 4 Fingers Road. Next, please.
The stonecutter's yard on the right. Last lap, crowded on a spit of land, silent shapes appeared. White, sorrowful, holding out calm hands, knelt in grief, pointing. Fragments of shapes, human, in the white silence, appealing, the best obtainable. Thomas H. Denani, monumental builder and sculptor. Passed. On the curbstone before Jimmy Curie, the sexton's, an old tramp sat grumbling, emptying the dirt and stones out of his huge dust-brown yawning boot. After life's journey. Gloomy gardens they went by, one by one, gloomy houses. Mr. Power pointed. That's where Childs was murdered, he said. The last house. So it is, Mr. Dedalus said. A gruesome case. Seymour Bush got him off. Murdered his brother, or so they said. The Crown had no evidence, Mr. Power said. Only circumstantial, Martin Cunningham added. That's the maxim of the law. Better for 99 guilty to escape than for one innocent person to be wrongfully condemned. They looked. Murderer's ground. It passed darkly. Shuttered, tenantless, unweeded garden. Old place gone to hell. Wrongfully condemned, murder. The murderer's image in the eye of the murdered. They loved reading about it. Man's head found in a garden. Her clothing consisted of. How she met her death. Recent outrage. The weapon used. Murder is still at large. Clues. A shoelace. A body to be exhumed. Murder will out. Cramped in this carriage. She mightn't like me to come that way without letting her know. Must be careful about women. Catch them once with their pants down. Never forgive you. After. 15. The high railings of Prospect rippled past their gaze. Dark poplars, rare white forms. Forms more frequent. White shapes thronged amid trees, white forms and fragments, streaming by mutely, sustaining vain gestures on the air. The felly harshed against the curbstone. Stopped. Martin Cunningham put out his arm and wrenching back the handle, shoved the door open with his knee. He stepped out. Mr. Power and Mr. Dedalus followed. Change that soap now. Mr. Bloom's hand unbuttoned his hip pocket swiftly and transferred the paper-stuck soap to his inner handkerchief pocket. He stepped out of the carriage, replacing the newspaper his other hand still held. Paltry funeral, coach and 3 carriages. It's all the same. Pallbearers, gold reins, requiem mass, firing a volley, pomp of death. Beyond the hind carriage, a hawker stood by his barrel of cakes and fruits. Simnel cakes, those are, stuck together. Cakes for the dead, dog biscuits. Who ate them? Mourners coming out. He followed his companions. Mr. Kernan and Ned Lambert followed, Hines walking after them. Corny Kelleher stood by the open hearse and took out the 2 wreaths. He handed one to the boy. Where's that child's funeral disappeared to? Jim?
A team of horses passed from Finglas, with toiling, plodding, red dragging through the funeral silence, a creaking wagon on which lay a granite block. The wagoner, marching at their head, saluted. Coffin now. Got here before us, dead as he is. Horse looking round at it with his plume skyaways, dull eye, collar tight on his neck, pressing on a blood vessel or something. Do they know what they cart out here every day? Must be 20 or 30 funerals every day. Then Mount Jerome for the Protestants. Funerals all over the world, everywhere, every minute. Shoveling them under by the cartload. Double quick, thousands every hour. Too many in the world. Mourners came out through the gates. Woman and a girl. Lean-jawed, happy, hard woman at a bargain. Her bonnet awry, girl's face stained with dirt and tears, holding the woman's arm, looking up at her for a sigh to cry. Vicious face, bloodless and livid. The mute shrouded the coffin and bore it through the gates. So much dead weight. Felt heavier myself stepping out of the bath. First the stiff, then the friends of the stiff. Corny Kelleher and the boy followed with the wreaths. Who is that beside them? Ah, the brother-in-law. All walked after. Martin Cunningham whispered. I was in mortal agony with you talking of suicide before Bloom. What? Mr. Power whispered. How so? His father poisoned himself, Martin Cunningham whispered. Had at the Queen's Hotel in Innis. You heard him say he was going to Clare. Anniversary. Oh God, Mr. Power whispered. First I heard of it. Poisoned himself. He glanced behind him to where a face with dark thinking eyes followed towards the Cardinal's mausoleum, speaking. Was he insured? Mr. Bloom asked. I believe so, Mr. Kiernan answered, but the policy was heavily mortgaged. Martin is trying to get the youngster into Artane. How many children did he have? 5, Ned Lambert said. He'll try to get one of the girls into Todd's. A sad case, Mr. Bloom said gently. 5 young children. A great blow to the poor wife, Mr. Kiernan added. Indeed, yes, Mr. Bloom agreed. Has the laugh at him now? He looked down at the boots as he polished. She had outlived him, lost her husband, more dead for her than for me. One must outlive the other, wise men say. There are more women than men in the world. Condole with her, your terrible loss. I hope you'll soon follow him. Sorry. For Hindu widows only. She would marry another. Him? No. Yes. Who knows after? Widowhood, not the thing since the old queen died. Drawn on a gun carriage, Victoria, Albert. Morning. But in the end, she put a few violets in her bonnet. Vain in her heart of hearts, all for a shadow. Consort not even a king. Her son was the substance. Something new to hope for, not like the past. She wanted back, waiting. It never comes. One must go first, alone under the ground, and lie no more in her warm bed. How are you, Simon? Ned Lambert said softly, clasping hands. Haven't seen you for a month of Sundays. Never better. How are all in Cork's own town? I was down there for the Cork Park races for Easter Monday, Ned Lambert said. Same old 6 and 8pence. Stopped with Dick TV. And how is Dick, the solid man? Duncan, please.
Oh, nothing between him and heaven, Ned Lambert answered. By the holy Paul, Mr. Dedalus said in subdued wonder. Dick Tivy bald? Martin is trying to get up a whip for the youngsters, Ned Lambert said, pointing ahead. If you bob a skull, just to keep them going till the insurance is cleared up. Yes, Mr. Dedalus said dubiously. Is that the oldest boy in front? Yes, Ned Lambert said. With his wife's brother, John Henry Menton, is behind. He put down his name for a quid. I'll engage he did, Mr. Dedalus said. I often told poor Paddy he ought to mind that job. John Henry is not the worst in the world. How did he lose it? Ned Lambert asked. Liquor? What? Ah, many a good man's fault, Mr. Dedalus said with a sigh. They halted about the door of the mortuary chapel. Mr. Bloom stood behind the boy with the wreath, looking down at his sleek combed hair and the slender furrowed neck inside his brand new collar. Poor boy. Was he there when the father? Both unconscious. Lightened up at the last moment and recognized for the last time all he might have done. I owe 3 shillings to O'Grady. Would he understand? The mutes bore the coffin into the chapel. Which end is his head? After a moment, he followed the others in, blinking in the screen light. The coffin lay on its bier before the chancel, 4 tall yellow candles at its corners, always in front of us. Orny Kelleher, laying a wreath at each 4 corner, beckoned the boy to kneel. The mourners knelt there and then in praying desk. Mr. Bloom stood behind near the font, and when all had knelt, dropped carefully his unfolded newspaper from his pocket and knelt his right knee upon it. He fitted his black hat gently on his left knee, holding its brim, bent over piously. Next.
A server, bearing a brass bucket with something in it, came out through a door. The white-smocked priest came after him, tidying his stole with one hand, balancing with the other a little book against his toad belly. Who'll read the book? I, said the rook. They halted by the bier, and the priest began to read out of his book with a fluent croak. Father Coffey. I knew his name was like a coffin. Domine nomine. Bully about the muzzle he looks, bosses the show, muscular Christian. Woe betide anyone that looks crooked at him. Priest, thou art Peter. Burst sideways like a sheep in clover, Dedalus says he will, with a belly on him like a poisoned pup. Most amusing expression that man finds. Burst sideways. Non intres in judicium cum servotur domine. Makes them feel more important to be prayed over in Latin. Requiem Mass, crepe weepers, black-edged notepaper, your name on the altar list. Chilly place this. Want to feed well. Sitting in there all the morning in the gloom, kicking his heels, waiting for the next please. Eyes of a toad too. What swells him up that way? Money gets swelled after cabbage. Air of the place, maybe. Looks full up of bad gas. Must be an infernal lot of bad gas round the place. Butchers, for instance. They get like raw beef steaks. Who was telling me? Mervyn Brown. Down in the vaults of St. Werburgh's lovely old organ, 150. They had to bore a hole in the coffin sometimes, to let out the bad gas and burn it. Out it rushes blue. One whiff of that and you're a goner. My kneecap was hurting me. That's better. The priest took a stick with a knob at the end of it out of the boy's bucket and shook it over the coffin. Then he walked to the other end and shook it again. Then he came back and put it back in the bucket, as you were before you rested. It's all written down. He has to do it. Next, please.
Et nenos, excuse me, et nenos in ducas in tentationem. The server piped the answers in the treble. I often thought it would be better to have boy servants, up to 15 or so. After that, of course, holy water that was, I expect, shaking sleep out of it. He must be fed up with that job, shaking that thing over all the corpses they trot up. What harm if you could see what he was shaking it over? Every mortal day a fresh batch, middle-aged men, old women, children, women dead in childbirth, mean with beards, bald-headed businessmen, consumptive girls with little sparrows' breasts. All the year round, he prayed the same thing over them and shook water on top of them. Sleep. On dignum, now. In paradisium. He said he was going to paradise, or is in paradise. Says that over everybody. Tiresome kind of a job, but he has to say something. Priest closed his book and went off, followed by the server. Horny Kelleher opened the side doors and the grave diggers came in, hoisted the coffin again, carried it out and shoved it on their cart. Horny Kelleher gave one wreath to the boy and one to the brother-in-law. All followed them out of the side doors and into the mild grey air. Mr. Bloom came last, folding his paper again into his pocket. He gazed gravely at the ground till the coffin cart wheeled off to the left. The metal wheels ground the gravel with a sharp grating cry, and the pack of blunt boots followed the barrow along a line of sepulchres. The ree, the ra, the ree, the ra, the roo. Lord, I mustn't lilt here. The O'Connell circle, Mr. Dedalus said about him. Mr. Power's soft eyes went up to the apex of the lofty cone. He's at rest, he said, in the middle of his people. Old Dano. But his heart is buried in Rome. How many broken hearts are buried here, Simon? Her grave is over there, Jack, Mr. Dedalus said. I'll soon be stretched beside her. Let him take me whenever he likes. Breaking down, he began to weep to himself quietly, stumbling a little in his walk. Mr. Power took his arm. She's better where she is, he said kindly. Next, please.
I suppose so, Mr. Dedalus said, with a weak gasp. I suppose she is in heaven. There is a heaven. Corny Kelleher stepped aside from his rank and allowed the mourners to plod by. Sad occasions, Mr. Kernan began politely. Mr. Bloom closed his eyes, and sadly twice bowed his head. The others are putting on their hats, Mr. Kernan said. I suppose we can do so too. We are the last. The cemetery is a treacherous place. They covered their heads. The reverend gentleman read the service too quickly, don't you think? Mr. Kernan said with reproof. Mr. Bloom nodded gravely, looking in the quick, bloodshot eyes, secret, searching eyes. Mason, I think, not sure. Beside him again, we are the last, in the same boat. Hope you say something else. Mr. Kernan added, the service of the Irish Church used in Mount Jerome is simpler, more impressive, I must say. Mr. Bloom gave prudent assent. The language, of course, was another thing. Mr. Kernan said with solemnity, I am the resurrection and the life. That touches a man's innermost heart. It does, Mr. Bloom said. Your heart, perhaps. But what price the fellow in the 6 feet by 2 with his toe into the daisies? Not touching that. Seat of the affections, broken heart. A pump, after all, pumping thousands of gallons of blood every day. One fine day it gets bunged up and there you are. Lots of them lying around here. Lungs, hearts, livers, old rusty pumps. Damn the thing else. The resurrection and the life. Once you are dead, you are dead. That last day idea, knocking them all up out of their graves. Come forth, Lazarus. And he came fifth and lost the job. Get up, last day. Then every fellow messing around for his liver and his lights and the rest of his traps. Find damn all of himself that morning. Pennyweight of powder in his skull. 12 grams, 1 pennyweight. Troy measure. Corny Kelleher fell into step at their side. Everything went off A1. He said, what? He looked on them from his drawling eyes, policeman's shoulders, with your turalum. As it should be, Mr. Kernan said. What? Eh? Corny Kelleher said. Mr. Kernan assured him, who is that chap behind with Tom Kernan? John Henry Menton asked. I know his face. Ned Lambert glanced back. Bloom, he said. Madame Marion Tweedy, is, the soprano. She's his wife. Oh, to be sure, John Henry Benton said. I haven't seen her for some time. She was a fine-looking woman. I danced with her 15, 17 golden years ago at Matt Dillon's in Roundtown. And a good armful she was. He looked behind to the others. What is he asked. What's he do? Wasn't he in the stationery line? I fell foul of him one evening, I remember, at Bowles. Ned Lambert smiled. Yes, he was, he said, in Wisdom Healy's, a traveller for blotting paper. God's name, John Henry Menton said. What did she marry a coon like that for? She had plenty of game in her then. Still, Ned Lambert said. He does some canvassing for ads. John Henry Menton's large eyes stared ahead. The barrow turned into a side lane. A portly man, ambushed among the grasses, raised his hat in homage. The gravedingers touched their caps. Did you go?
John O'Connell, Mr. Power said, pleased. He never forgets a friend. Mr. O'Connell shook all their hands in silence. Mr. Dedalus said, I'm come to pay you another visit. My dear Simon, caretaker answered in a low voice, I don't want your custom at all. Saluting Ned Lambert and John Henry Menton, he walked on at Martin Cunningham's side, puzzling to kiss at his back. Did you hear that one? He asked them about Mackay from the comb. I didn't, Martin Cunningham said. They bent their silk hats in concert, and Heinz inclined his ear. The caretaker hung his thumbs in the loops of his gold watch chain and spoke in a discreet tone to their vacant smiles. They tell the story, he said, that two drunks came out here one foggy evening to look for the grave of a friend of theirs. They asked for Mercury from the comb and were told where he was buried. After traipsing about in fog, they found the grave, sure enough. One of the drunks spelled out the name, Terence Mercury. The other drunk was blinking up at the statue of our savior the window had got put up. The caretaker banked up at one of the sepulchres. They passed, he resumed, and after blinking up at the sacred figure, not a bloody bit like the man, says he. That's not Mercury, says he. Whoever done it? Rewarded by smiles, he fell back and spoke with Corny Kelleher, accepting the dockets given him, turning them over and scanning them as he walked. That's all done with a purpose, Martin Cunningham explained to Heinz. I know, Heinz said. I know that. To cheer a fellow up, Martin Cunningham said. It's pure good-heartedness, damn the thing else. Mr. Broom admired the caretaker's prosperous back. All want to be on good terms with him. Decent fellow, John McConnell, real good sort. Kids, like kids at. No fear of anyone getting out, no pass-out checks. Herbert Cops. I must see about that ad after the funeral. Did I write Ballsbridge on the envelope I took to cover when she disturbed me writing to mother? Hope it's not checked in the dead letter office. Be the better of shape. Gray sprouting beard. That's the first sign when the hairs come out gray and temper getting cross. Silver threads among the gray. Fancy being his wife. Wonder how he had the gumptions to propose to any girl. Propose to any girl. Come out and live in the graveyard. Dangle that before her. It might thrill her first. Courting death. Shades of night hovering here with all the dead stretched about. The shadows of the tombs, when churchyards yawn, and Daniel O'Connell must be a descendant, I suppose. Who is this? Used to say he was a queer, breedy man, great Catholic, all the same, like a big giant in the dark. Willow the wisp, gods of graves. Want to keep her mind off it to conceive at all. Women especially are so touchy. Tell her ghost story in bed to make her sleep. Have you ever seen a ghost? Well, I have. It was a pitch dark night. The clock was on the stroke of 12. Still, they'd kiss all right if properly keyed up. Fords in Turkish graveyard. Learn anything if taken young. You might pick up a young widow here. Men like that. Love among the tombstones. Romeo. Spice of pleasure. In the midst of death we are in life. Both ends meet. Tantalizing for the poor dead. Smell of frilled beefsteaks to the starving gnawing their vitals. Desire to Greek people. Maury wanting to do it at the window. 8 children he has anyway. Next, please.
You've seen a fair share go under in his time. lying about him, field after field, holy fields. More room if they buried them standing. Sitting or kneeling you couldn't. Standing? His head might come up some day above ground in a landslip with his hand pointing. All honeycombed the ground must be, oblong cells. Very neat he keeps it too, trim grass and edgings. His garden, Major Gamble calls Mount Jerome. Well, so it is. Ought to be flowers of sleep. Chinese cemeteries with giant poppies growing produce the best opium. Mastanansky told me. The botanic gardens are just over there. It's the blood sinking in the earth gives new life. Some idea those Jews, they said, killed the Christian boy. Every man his price. Well-preserved fat corpse. Gentleman, epicure, valuable for fruit garden. A bargain. By carcass of William Wilkinson, auditor and accountant, lately deceased. £3, 13 and 6. With thanks. I dare say the soil would be quite fat with corpse manure, bones, flesh, nails, carnal houses, dreadful, turning green and pink, decomposing, rot quick in damp earth, the lean old ones tougher, then a kind of tallowy, kind of cheesy, then begin to get black treacle oozing out of them, then dried up, dead moss. Of course, the cells are where whatever they are go on living, changing about, live forever practically. Nothing to feed on themselves. They must breed a devil of a lot of maggots. Soil must be simply swirling with them. Your head, it simply swirls. Those pretty little seaside girls. He looks cheerful enough over it, gives him a sense of power, seeing all the others go under first. Wonder how he looks at life. Cracking his jokes, too. Warms the cockles of the heart. The one about the bulletin. Spurgeon went to heaven 4 a.m. this morning. 11 p.m. closing time. Not arrived yet. Peter. The dead themselves, the men anyhow, would like to hear an odd joke, or the women to know what's in fashion. Juicy pear or ladies' punch. Hot, strong, and sweet. Keep out the damp. You must laugh sometimes, so better do it that way. Grave diggers in Hamlet. Shows the profound knowledge of the human heart. Daren't joke about the dead for 2 years at least. De mortuis nil nisi prius. Go out of mourning first. Hard to imagine his funeral. Seems a sort of joke. Read your own obituary notice. They say you live longer. Gives you a second wind, new lease of life. How many have you for tomorrow? The caretaker asked. 2, Gordy Kelleher said. 10 and 11. The caretaker put the papers in his pocket. The barrow had ceased to trundle. The mourners split and moved to each side of the hole, stepping with care around the graves. The grave diggers bore the coffin and set its nose on the brink, looping the bands around it. Burying him. We come to bury Caesar, his Ides of March or June. He doesn't know who's here, nor care. Jim?
Now, who is that lanky-looking galoot over there in the Macintosh? Now, who is he? I'd like to know. Now, I'd give a trifle to know who he is. Always someone turns up you never dreamt of. A fellow could live on his lonesome all his life. Yes, he could. Still, he'd have to get someone to sod him after he died, though he could dig his own grave. We all do. Only man buries. No ants too. First thing strikes anybody. Bury the dead. Say Robinson Crusoe was true to life. Well then, Friday buried him. Every Friday buries a Thursday, if you come to look at it. Oh, poor Robinson Crusoe. How could you possibly do so? Poor Dignam. His last lie on earth and in his box. When you think of them all, it does seem a waste of wood. All gnawed through. They could invent a handsome buyer, a kind of panel sliding, let it down that way. Aye, but they could object to be buried out of another fellow's. They are so particular. Lay me in my native earth, bit of clay from the Holy Land. Only a mother and a dead-born child ever buried in the one coffin. I see what it means, I see. To protect him as long as possible, even in the earth. The Irishman's house is his coffin. Embalming in catacombs, mummies, the same idea. Mr. Bloom stood back, his hat in his hand, counting the bared heads. 12. I'm 13. No, the chap in the Macintosh is 13. Death's number. Where the deuce did he pop out of? He wasn't in the chapel, that I'll swear. Silly superstition, that about 13. Okay, Duncan.
So, I would like to go one more round and complete the chapter. Is that okay?
Okay, yeah.
Okay. And, okay, I had one vocal response.
Yes, yes.
Okay. Nice soft tweed Ned Lambert has in that suit. Tinge of purple. I had one like that when we lived in Lombard Street near Lombard Street West. Dressy fellow he was once. Used to change suits, 3 suits in a day. Must get that gray suit of mine turned by Messias. Hello, it's dyed. His wife forgot he's not married, or his landlady ought to have picked out those threads for him. The coffin dived out of sight, eased down by the men straddling on the grave trestles. They struggled up and out, and all uncovered 20. Pause. If we were all suddenly someone else. Far away a donkey braid, rain, no such ass. Never see a dead one, they say. Shame of death. They hide. Also, poor Papa went away. Gentle, sweet air blew round the bared heads in a whisper. The boy by the grave head held his wreath with both hands, staring quietly in the black open space. Mr. Bloom moved behind the portly, kindly caretaker. Well-cut frock coat. Weighing them up, perhaps, to see which will go next. Well, it is a long rest. Feel no more. It's the moment you feel. Must be damned unpleasant. Can't believe it at first. Mistake must be. Somebody else. Try the house opposite. Wait, I want to. I haven't yet. Then darkened death chamber. Light they want, whispering around you. Would you like to see a priest? Then rambling and wandering, delirium all you hid all your life. The death struggle. His sleep is not natural. Press his lower eyelid. Watching is his nose, pointed is his jaw, sinking are the soles of his feet yellow. Pull the pillow away and finish it off on the floor, since he's doomed. Devil in that picture of a sinner's death, showing him a woman, dying to embrace her in his shirt. Last act of Lucia. Shall I never more behold thee? Bam! Expires all, gone at last. People talk about you a bit, forget you. Don't forget to pray for him. Remember him in his prayer, in your prayers. Even Parnell. Ivy Day dying out. Then they follow, dropping in a hole, one after the other. We are praying now for the repose of his soul, hoping you're well and not in hell. Nice change of air, out of the frying pan of life into the fire of purgatory. Does he ever think of the hole waiting for himself? They say you do when you shiver in the sun. Someone walking over it, call boys warning near you. Mine over there towards Finglas, the plot I bought. Mama, poor Mama, and little Rudy. Next, please.
The grave diggers took up their spades and flung heavy clods of clay in on the coffin. Mr. Bloom turned his face. And if he was alive all the time, phew, by jingo, that would be awful. No, he is dead. Of course he's dead. Monday he died. They ought to have some law to pierce the heart and make sure, or an electric clock or a telephone in the coffin, and some kind of a canvas air hole. Flag of distress, 3 days. Brought along to keep in them in summer. Just as well to get shut of them as sure as you were sure there's no. Clay fell softer. begin to be forgotten, out of sight, out of mind. The caretaker moved away a few paces and put on his hat. Had enough of it. The mourners took heart of grace, and one by one covered themselves without show. Mr. Bloom put on his hat and saw the portly figure make its way deftly through the maze of graves. Quietly sure of his ground, he traversed the dismal fields. Hines jotting down something in his notebook. The names. But he knows them all. No, coming to me. I'm just taking the names, Hines said below his breath. What is your Christian name? I'm not sure. Mr. Bloom said, Leopold. And you might put down McCoy's name too. He asked me to. Charlie, Hines said, writing. I know. He was on the Freemen once. So he was before he got the job in the morgue under Louis Byrne. Good idea, post-mortem for doctors. Find out what they imagine they know. He died of a Tuesday, got the run. 11 days with the cash of a few ads. Charlie, you're my darling. That was why he asked me to. Oh well, there's no harm. I saw through that. McCoy. Thanks, old chap, much obliged. Leave him under an obligation, costs nothing. And tell us, Hines said, you know that fellow over there in the, he looked around, Mackintosh. Yes, I saw him, Mr. Bloom said. Where is he now? Mackintosh, Hines said, scribbling. I don't know who he is. Is that his name? Next, please.
Moved away, looking about him. No, Mr. Bloom began, turning and stopping. I say, Hines. Didn't hear. What? What has he disappeared to? Not a sign. Well, of all the... Has anybody here seen? Kell become invisible. Good Lord, what became of him? A seventh grave digger came beside Bloom to take up an idle spade. Oh, excuse me. He stepped aside nimbly. Clay, brown, damp, began to be seen in the hole. It rose, nearly over. A mound of damp clods rose more, rose, and the grave diggers rested their spades, all uncovered again for a few instants. The boy propped his wreath against a corner. The brother-in-law hid on a lump. The grave diggers put on their caps and carried their earthy spades towards the barrow. They knocked the blades lightly on the turf beam. One bent to pluck from the haft a long tuft of grass. One, leaving his mates, walked slowly on with shouldered weapon, its blade blue glancing. Silently at the grave head, another coiled the coffin band, his navel cord. The brother-in-law, turning away, placed something in his free hand. Thanks in silence. Sorry, sir. Trouble. Head shake. I know that. For yourselves, just. The mourners moved away slowly without aim, by devious paths, staying a while to read a name on a tomb. Let us go round by the chief's grave, Hines said. We have time. Let us, Mr. Power said. They turned to the right, following their slow thoughts. With awe, Mr. Power's blank voice spoke. Some say he is not in that grave at all, that the coffin was filled with stones, that one day he would come again. Hines shook his head. Parnell will never come again, he said. He's there. All that was mortal of him, peace to his ashes. Mr. Bloom walked unheeded along his grove by saddened angels. Crosses, broken pillars, family vaults, stone hopes praying with upcast eyes, old Ireland's hearts and hands. More sensible to spend the money on some charity for the living, pray for the repose of the soul of. Does anybody really? Next, please.
Plant him and have done with them. Like down a coal chute. Then lump them together to save time. All Souls Day, 27th, I'll be at his grave. 10 shillings for the gardener. He keeps it free of weeds. Old man himself. Bent down double with his shears clipping. Near death's door. Who passed away? Who departed this life? As if they did it of their own accord. got the shove, all of them. Who kicked the buggers? More interesting if they told you what they were. So-and-so, wheelwright. I travelled for Cork, I know. I paid 5 shillings in the pound. Or a woman's with her saucepan. I cook good Irish stew. Eulogy in a country churchyard. It ought to be that poem of whose is it, Wordsworth or Thomas Campbell? Entered into rest, the Protestants put it. Old Dr. Murrins, the great physician, called him home. Well, it's God's acre for them. Nice country residence, nearly plastered and painted. Ideal spot of a quiet smoke. And read the church times. Marriage ads, they never try to beautify. Rusty reeds hung on knobs. Garlands of bronze foil. Better value that for the money. Still, the flowers are more poetical. The other gets rather tiresome, never withering. Expresses nothing. Immortals. A bird sat tamely perched on a poplar branch, like stuffed. Like the wedding present from President Alderman Hooper gave us. Not a budge out of him. Knows there are no catapults to let fly at him. Den animal even sadder. Silly Millie burying the little dead bird in the kitchen matchbox. A daisy chain and bits of broken chainies on the grave. The Sacred Heart, that is, showing it, heart on his sleeve. Ought to be sideways and red. It should be painted like a real heart. Ireland was dedicated to it, or whatever that. Seems anything but pleased. Why this infliction? Where'd birds come then and peck, like the boy with the basket of fruit? But he said no, because they ought to have been afraid of the boy. Apollo, that was. Michiko?
How many? All these here once walked around Dublin, faithful departed, as you are now, so once were we. Besides, how could you remember everybody? Eyes, work, boys. Well, the boys, yes. Gramophone. Have a gramophone in every grave or keep it in the house. After dinner on Sunday, put on poor old great-grandfather Hello, hello, hello. I'm awfully glad, Kirk, awfully glad to see again. Hello, hello. I'm awful cop. Remind you of the voice like the photograph remind you of the face. Otherwise, you couldn't remember the face after 15 years, say. For instance, who? For instance, some fellow that died when I was in Wisdom Hales. There's a lot of pebbles. Wait, stop. He looked down intently into a stone crypt. Some animal. Wait. There he goes. An obese gray rat toddled along the side of the crypt, moving the pebbles. An old stager, great-grandfather. He knows the ropes. The gray alive crushed itself in under the plinth, wriggled itself in under it. Good hiding place for treasure. Who lives there? Laid the remains of Robert Emery. Robert Emmet was buried here by torchlight, wasn't he? Making his rounds. Tail gone now. One of those chaps would make short work of a fellow. Pick the bones clean no matter who it was. Ordinary meat for them. A corpse's meat gone bad. Well, and what's cheese? Cups of milk. I read in that Voyages in China that the Chinese say white man smells like a corpse. Cremation better. Who is dead against it? leveling for the other farm. Wholesale burners and Dutch oven dealers. Time of the plague. Quicklime fever pit to eat them. Lethal chamber. Ashes to ashes. Or bury at sea. Where is that palsy top of silence? Eaten by birds. Earth, fire, water. Drowning, they say, is a pleasantest. See your whole life in a flash. But being brought back to life, no. Can't bury in the air, however. Out of a flying machine. Wonder does the news go about whenever a fresh one is let down. Underground communication. We learned that from them. Wouldn't be surprised. Regular square feed for them. Flies come before he's well dead. Got wind of Dignam. They wouldn't care about the smell of it. Salt white crumbling much of corpse. Smell, tastes like raw white turnips. Next, please.
The gates glimmered in front, still open. Back to the world again. Enough of this place. Brings you a bit nearer every time. Last time I was here was at Mrs. Sinico's funeral. Poor Papa, too. Oh, the love that kills. And even scraping up the earth at night with a lantern, like that case I read of, to get at fresh buried females, or even putrefied with running grave sores, give you the creeps after a bit. I will appear to you after death. You will see my ghost after death. My ghost will haunt you after death. There's another world after death named Hell. I do not like that other world, she wrote. No more do I. Plenty to see and hear and feel yet. Feel live, warm beings near you. Let them sleep in their maggoty beds. You're not going to get me this innings. Warm beds, warm, full-blooded life. Martin Cunningham emerged from the side path, talking gravely. Solicitor, I think. I know his face. Menton. John Henry, solicitor. Commissioner for oaths and affidavits. Dignam used to be in his office. Matt Dillon's long ago. Jolly Matt. Convivial evenings. Cold fowl, cigars that tonsile his glasses. Heart of gold, really. Yes, Menton. Got his rag out that evening on the bowling green because I sallied inside him. Pure fluke of mine, the bias. Why he took such a rooted dislike to me. Hate at first sight. Molly and Floey Dillon linked under the lilac tree laughing. Fellow always like that. Mortified if women are by. Finish her off, Jim.
Got a dinge on the side of his head, carriage probably. Excuse me, sir, Mr. Bloom said beside them. They stopped. Your hat is a little crushed, Mr. Bloom said, pointing. John Henry Menton stared at him for an instant without moving. There, Martin Cunningham helped, pointing also. John Henry Menton took off his hat, bulged out the dinge, and smoothed the nape with care on his coat sleeve. He clapped on the hat on his head again. It's all right now, Martin Cunningham said. John Henry Menton jerked his head down in acknowledgement. Thank you, he said sharply. They walked on towards the gates. Mr. Bloom, chapfallen, drew behind a few paces so as not to overhear. Martin laying down the law. Martin could wind a sappy head like that around his little finger without his seeing it. Oyster eyes, never mind. Be sorry after, perhaps, when it dawns on him. Get the pull over him that way. Thank you. How grand we are this morning.
Ah, very good.
Mm,
Very good. Very satisfying to read the whole chapter.
absolutely. Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
I thought it was interesting that the bulk of the chapter was Bloom thinking, his stream of consciousness. And that was so well balanced by Joyce with the conversational stuff that was going between the guys. in the carriage going to the graveyard and at the graveyard and coming back. I just found that interesting, and Bloom's thoughts sort of swirling all over the place and being set off in different directions by different things that he saw.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is a very rich section, and
Mm.
it's, you know, it's uh, and ending with that little incident with John Henry Menton, I think is just perfect.
Yeah.
Because it's so trivial. I mean, here they are, you know, facing death and eternity, and you know, saying goodbye to an acquaintance and all that. And then there's this little tiff as they're leaving,
Done,
as
Connie.
they're leaving in the cemetery about a little dent in the hat.
There's some lovely imagery in this as well. You know, the section there that starts with the grave diggers took up their spades and flung heavy clods. That's very real. We've all probably stood around a graveside like that. But then after the prayers, the gravediggers come back and he says, the clay fell softer, begin to be forgotten, out of
Mhm.
sight, out of mind. I think that's terrific stuff.
Mhm. Ah, very good. Very good. Okay, well, I think we're all pretty full. Does anybody have anything that they want to say before we wrap up this session?
Is Bloom in the carriage because somebody else couldn't make it? And if so, who's the somebody else?
Huh.
Good point.
I don't think he's in it because somebody else couldn't make it. I think that was just some reason he was to be in that carriage.
Yeah, he's in one carriage. Martin Cunningham, Jack Power, Simon Dedalus, and Leopold. And behind then is Tom Kiernan, Ned Lambert, and Hines. What I was trying to figure out, but I don't know this part of Dublin, did they go past Eccles Street to go to Glasnevin? Or
Yes.
near
Yes.
Eccles Street?
That's because
They swung by it, yeah. Sorry, Dave, yeah. They swung by Eccles Street because Bloom talks about looking down Eccles Street
Yes.
and the
Yeah,
hospital. And I have a very clear image of the road there, which swings around into Phibsborough. And I think Phibsborough was mentioned somewhere. Would you agree with that, Joe?
I think so, yeah. Yeah.
Mhm. So I have a question that just came to my mind. There's only a very few people that are going to Patty Dignam's funeral. This is a very, very simple funeral. There's only two coaches. So what is the relationship that Bloom would be part of the group?
Well, didn't he know all these people?
He knows all the people.
Yeah, but I'm not saying that he was friendly with them, but he was familiar with them.
Yeah. You must have known him some way because Molly did mention it. Do you remember she came in with the newspaper to him?
Yeah.
Now, how friendly he would have been, I don't know. So
Yeah.
they must have known the family.
Do we know what Paddy Dignam did? What his trade was with that?
He worked for John
He
Henry.
worked Henry Menton. He worked in the solicitor's office for John Henry Menton. No, he lost the job.
Unless Bloom had some dealings with them in an official capacity, although, I mean, he was looking for ads, so can't imagine what that might have been.
The interesting thing on that question, which I don't know the answer to, is that Mrs. Sinico lives quite near Paddy Dignam, and Bloom has also been at Mrs. Sinico's funeral. Mrs. Sinico is from a simple case in Dubliners.
But maybe Paddy Dignam was a neighbour.
he was a neighbor of Mrs. Cynical. If this is fiction,
Sure.
but the fact that he's from that area, he's been to 2 funerals. It does indicate some connection, but we don't know. I don't know anyway. I can't see it.
Would Paddy Dignam have been a neighbor, I wonder?
That's
Well, not away the street. He unless in the past he might have been, but there's no there's no information that I can find on it.
well, and later on we have Bloom being very, very concerned about raising money
Yeah,
for he and Martin Cunningham
yeah, and he gets
are
generous.
involved in actually raising money for the widow and the children.
Yeah, and they're defending her interest in the insurance policy, and they take the trouble of going over there to advise the widow not to surrender the policy to the moneylender. So there's some connection there that they know each other.
Mm-hmm.
But the interesting thing about Paddy Dignam's funeral, there seems to be no religious service. Like they're not attending a church; they're going to his house.
But did they not go to a church in Glasnevin?
No.
No?
That's like a small church, yeah, where the priest comes out and does the blessing.
The church where but there doesn't seem to have been a funeral mass, and yet he seems to be a Catholic. And whereas that happens nowadays, I would have thought back in the day it would have been almost unheard of. This is kind of
sorry, Joe, just in my notes here, it's talking about the characters in Joyce.
Yeah.
And it says Patrick Paddy Dignam. Leopold Bloom attends his funeral from the family home to Glasnevin Cemetery in the chapter Hades. He is survived by Mrs. Dignam and their son, Patrick Aloysius Patsy Dignam. The Dignams live at number 9 Newbridge Avenue, Sandymount. That's a long way away.
Yeah.
As he dies in a drunken stupor, he is considered in Joyce's analogue as Elpenor, who died in similar circumstances and who greeted his friend Odysseus.
Yeah, and he uses a joke from Homer there, because Odysseus goes to the underworld, and the first person he meets is Elpenor, who's a common soldier who dies of drink by managing to fall off a roof while asleep, or rolls off a flat roof. And he says, "Oh, you got here ahead of your commander. You drunk dead in all a jar." That's kind of Homeric joke in there in Homer, and Joyce uses that practically word for word.
Mm-hmm.
I love that little carriage, the 4 seats. It's like an incubation, and they're on their way to the underworld. And if you look at them, you boil them all in a pot, you wouldn't come back out with a marriage. Stephen Dedalus's wife is dead. Power is running another woman, and Cunningham's wife is drunk. And then Bloom's wife is presumably with Mr. Boyle. That's sort of all their sort of marital situations are in this little pot almost, and then the asking a man of Jewish extraction his Christian name. It's very, and then talking about people who commit suicide. Not knowing that. Grandfather committed suicide. It's sort of the examination of the soul on the way to the next world.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
It's also acknowledged in my notes here. It says that there are many characters like Paddy Dignam in Ulysses, whom we know very little about. But he has a real world counterpart, a Joyce family friend called Matthew Kane. Like Dignam, Kane died suddenly and left behind 5 children for whom his friends raised money after his death. Dignam died of alcoholism, though in polite conversation his death is blamed on a heart condition. Kane, on the other hand, drowned in July of 1904 on a boating excursion in Dublin Bay. Kane dove into the water for a swim. While in the water, he experienced some kind of acute distress. Some sources say heart attack, others say stroke. Regardless, Kane was pulled from the water but didn't survive.
Yeah, yeah. Go, yeah. It's absolutely packed with material, you know, like
Oh,
it-
yeah.
story.
It's very, yes, it's very packed with material. And that one thing that always strikes me over and over again is that little what happens when telling the story of Reuben J. And the pitiful competition between Martin and Bloom to get to tell the story.
Yeah,
As if to offer up the story of Reuben J. as a sacrificial lamb, so to speak, to deflect attention from themselves.
yes,
Um,
yes.
And it's particularly pitiful when Bloom tries to jump in and tell the story because he wants to be one of the boys.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
I think that's a theme, Duncan, that runs right through this, not just through this chapter, but he appears to be a loner, but wants to be in with the crew, you know? And I think they're laughing at him a little bit.
That's right. Yeah, because when he's not there, they're saying, "What does she go and marry a fella like him for?" You know.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's Menton. But Menton, the problem, it's not about a dinge in the hat. It's about Molly, because at the same event of Matt Dillon's in Roundtown, Menton was taking a shine to Molly,
Mm-hmm.
and as Bloom says, he sailed inside him. You see, there Bloom has metempsychosis, still memories of being a sailing, fighting man. Sailing inside is a game of bowls. You're sailing the other guy, but it's also how you capture a ship in the olden days. You take the wind from its sails by sailing inside it. So Odysseus is coming to surface there in Bloom, but he sailed inside him and got Molly's attention. And this is what Menton is saying, what's he going to marry a fella like that for? You know, what's he do? Is he a salesman or some sort? Jeez, right, you know. So there's a lot of tensions running in this.
Right. So let me confirm. So the sailing inside in the actual, when we're actually talking about sailing,
Yeah.
that one ship gets between the wind and the other ship.
Yeah, you take the wind, and that brings
You literally capture the wind that the other ship is relying on.
And it brings it to a halt. Then you board it and kill everyone and take its goods.
Okay.
You know, this is you come along and cut it, so it's yours. That's the tech, but it's a term in bowling, sailing inside. I don't ask me now. I have the faintest idea how bowls are played.
I think, Joe, what it means in the bowling terms is that if you sail inside, you're trying to get close to the jack, which is the object ball.
Right.
And if you sail inside, you're preventing your opponent from getting closer. So that would be sailing inside, because, as you know, when you bowl, it's a curved pattern.
And
I'd say that's what it means.
That's what he did with Molly. He sailed inside and cut his line.
He stole a march, in other words.
Stole a march. Yeah. You can actually go to that building where Joyce pictures that game of bowls in Rathgar and Brighton Road.
Oh, really? Yeah.
And it's now a creche. And a couple of times, you know, sort of with people with brass necks that I hang around with. One goes up and asks, "Can we come in to see the joystick?" And on 2 occasions we've been let in, and you can you're where Molly meets Bloom, both fictional characters, right? But you can still see the bowling ground, even though it's no longer used in that way.
Oh, yeah, that's just down the road from me. I must go and have a look at that.
Brighton Road, I can't remember the number. It's got a plaque on it to say that this is where the actual Matt Dillon lived. Matt Dillon did there's another house up there just before the convent in Terranure, on the road up to the KCR, and it's Medina Villa, and Joyce places this in Medina Villa.
Okay.
But the actual plaque for the house where Matt Dillon lived with his bevy of daughters is down on Brighton Road. I think it's number 14 or number 11. It's that kind. But you
Okay.
can't miss it. You get it in the notes there probably.
Sure. I'll check that out. Yeah.
And if you have the brass neck to go up and ask, to let you in.
I may not do that. I might be asked to babysit. So
and we know, and that's where he sees Bloom sees Stephen for the first time, and he's a young boy because he's a child, and we know that the Joyces came to a little soiree there in I can't remember the year when Joyce was a boy of the same age as Stephen is represented as being, and we have the letter that saying they were attending, so we know they were there on a particular day in a particular year. So that's like even at that age, he was. Joyce was sort of making mental notes that he would later turn into a story. So Duncan has left us, has he?
Well, he was having internet connection problems. And this is just to loop back to the question you were asking. I don't know what edition you have. Mine's the Gabler. It's page, if you want to mark the Eccles Street reference, page 80, line 376. But if you don't have this edition, I don't know if that helps you.
No, I think, yeah.
Okay, so here's what you can do. It says, and they call me the jewel of Asia, the geisha. It's in italics if you go down half a page. It's just after that.
Oh, yes, I am there.
Yeah. So I'm not sure if you're instant marking or not, but that's where it is.
Thank you. I was just wondering why he crossed the whole of Dublin. Why he just didn't go up to Glasnevin from Eccles Street.
I suppose to attend. Maybe, I don't know.
Well,
It's a sensible thing to do.
Right, he met the coach somewhere, right?
Yeah, outside Igham's house in Sandymount.
He boarded it with all the others. The other three, they all boarded it.
From Digham's house. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, I think he wanted to leave the house early. Anyway, he knew about boys coming to visit, and he wanted to get out of Molly's way. He's a very cooperative fellow in some way. Right. Well, I think I'll say thank you very much. This has been a lot of fun, and I'm glad we had some time for a little chat at the end of it, because that was also quite enlightening. So,
thank you.
I'm glad that my internet connection held out until almost the very end, because I froze up and then I was disconnected there for a minute or so. So, any last minute things before I push the red button on my side that ends this session?
Say thank you to everyone.
Thank you very much.
It's been great.
Thank you.
It's wonderful as usual.